What happens when a quiet systems engineer, calm, invisible, almost forgotten, gets pushed out by the CEO's daughter trying to prove herself? And what if everything he held together suddenly falls apart? Elias Monroe never craved titles or applause. He didn't make noise. He made sure things worked. But when Madeline Carmichael, fresh off her MBA and hungry for authority, fired him without a second thought, she had no idea he was the only thing standing between Redbridge Systems and total collapse. Why did Elias walk away without a fight? What secrets was he quietly protecting? And how does a man who leads in silence leave a legacy loud enough to be heard even after he's gone? This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about presence, about the people we overlook until it's too late. If you've ever been underestimated, replaced, or silenced, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. The first time Elias Monroe walked into Redbridge Data, he had a second-hand laptop in one hand and a box of his old textbooks in the other. That was 11 years ago. Back then, the office was a rented loft above a pizza shop, and the floors creaked when you walked too fast. There was no IT department, no HR, just 4 people and a dream that software could make sense of chaos, sort massive, ugly datasets, and give meaning to the mess businesses drown in every day. Elias had been the quiet one, not antisocial, just still. He never liked meetings, never talked over anyone. When he did speak, people leaned in, because when Elias spoke, it was important. He didn't come to Redbridge for money. He could have doubled his salary elsewhere. But he liked the challenge, the blank canvas, the raw opportunity of building something from zero and watching it come alive. And Redbridge did come alive. The platform Elias designed handled data so efficiently it cut client costs in half. Soon, clients multiplied. Then the company did. By year 5, they had offices in 2 cities. Year 8, Elias helped re-architect the infrastructure for scale. Quietly, like always. He never wanted a title, never asked for raises, never brought up how often he worked through weekends, skipped holidays, fixed bugs before people even noticed they existed. Because to Elias, the code mattered more than the credit. It was his fingerprint on the world, hidden in servers and logs, invisible to the eye, but undeniably there. And for a long time, he believed that mattered. He believed loyalty still meant something, that building something with care and consistency would be recognized, even if it wasn't flashy. But loyalty isn't loud. And neither was he. Now at 38, Elias still carried the same calm silence. He wasn't flashy. He wore the same navy hoodie to work most days, walked instead of drove, brought his lunch in a brown paper bag. He was the kind of man who fixed a bug at 2 a.m. and didn't mention it in the Monday stand-up. The kind of man who made a system so stable people forgot it could break. He lived alone in a small apartment in Edgewater. Simple, neat. Books lined the windowsill. A cracked Moleskine notebook sat beside his monitor with small looping notes in pencil. Occasionally, he'd visit his mom's old house, now empty after her passing 3 winters ago. He kept the garden alive even though no one saw it. He never called himself lonely, but silence had grown so familiar it felt like air. Still, he showed up every morning, logged in early, ran diagnostics, reviewed lines of code like they were poems. Because to Elias, systems had souls, not human ones but quiet ones, hidden ones. And he had protected those souls for over a decade. So when Jonah Carmichael, Redbridge's founder, sent out the email announcing his retirement, Elias just stared at the screen. He'd known it would come eventually. Jonah was getting older, hands shaking in meetings now. Still, he had been the only one who understood Elias, the only one who read between the silences. The email ended with, "The future of Redbridge is in good hands. My daughter Madeline will step in as interim CEO, effective Monday." Elias blinked. Madeline Carmichael. He remembered her vaguely, once or twice, years ago. Business school, ambitious, confident, bright, probably, but not a builder. Not an engineer. And definitely not someone who would understand the soul of a system written line, by hand, across years of quiet sacrifice. Still, Elias said nothing. He clicked back to his code, ran a system health check. The server purred, stable. Like always. And for a brief moment, he allowed himself to believe the transition would be smooth. That the foundation he built would matter more than who walked into the corner office. But somewhere in the quiet, something shifted. A stillness, like the breath before a storm. He didn't know it yet, But in 5 days, he would be locked out of his own system. In 6, the entire platform would be on the brink of collapse. And no one, not the new CEO, not the board, not the bright new consultants, would know how to save it. He would not say, "I told you so," but he would remember. He would remember everything. Monday morning came dressed in sunlight, but something in the air felt tight. Elias arrived early, as always. 7:15 a.m. The office lights flickered to life as he swiped his badge and walked past the quiet glass lobby. The security guard, Oscar, gave him a small nod. Elias returned it. At his desk, the servers hummed in rhythm, exactly as they should. He ran the overnight logs, checked the system metrics. Everything passed. He sent a short update to the DevOps channel. All services stable, CPU load 2%, backup sync confirmed. He didn't expect a reply. He never got one. That was fine. By 8:45, chatter filled the hall. People who normally strolled in half awake were suddenly peppy, smiling, wide-eyed. It was a different kind of energy. Corporate buzz mixed with speculation. And then the elevator dinged. Madeline Carmichael stepped out, flanked by 2 people Elias didn't recognize. She wore a tailored gray pantsuit, heels that clacked against the floor with authority, and a smile that said, "I belong here, even if I'm still deciding how." People stood, someone clapped. Elias didn't. He watched, calm but distant, as she made her rounds, shaking hands, greeting old faces. He noticed how her eyes skimmed over him as if trying to place him. But she didn't stop. She didn't introduce herself, didn't ask his name, just passed by. That, Elias thought, was the first sign. By noon, she'd already called a town hall meeting. Everyone crammed into the open-floor lounge. Snacks were arranged, pitch deck ready. Madeline took the mic. "I know many of you may be unsure what this next chapter looks like," she began, "but I promise it will be bold, agile, forward-thinking. My father built Redbridge on innovation. I intend to scale it with vision." Elias stood at the back, arms crossed. "We've brought in some outside consultants to evaluate our internal processes. We'll be reviewing infrastructure, tech stacks, personnel roles, looking at where we can optimize, modernize, even automate." Elias blinked once. Personnel roles. The phrase sat heavy in his stomach. Not because he feared it, he'd weathered change before, but because he knew what it meant when executives used words like optimize. It meant decisions made in boardrooms, far from the code. It meant assumptions, not understanding. The consultants were introduced. Jake Wyatt and Nora Lum, both mid-30s. Suits, polished smiles. Elias recognized Jake's name from a DevSecOps blog filled with jargon-heavy posts but very little fieldwork. Later that afternoon, Jake stopped by Elias's desk. "Hey man, you're Elias, right?" "Yes." "Awesome. So listen, we're doing a full audit of the back-end systems. Just wondering if you could share admin credentials so we can poke around." "No," Elias said plainly. Jake blinked. "Sorry, I don't share root access. I can walk you through the architecture if you'd like." "Right, but I mean, we're here to restructure, so it's kind of critical that we have unrestricted access. Then we should speak with legal." Jake laughed, unsure if Elias was joking. Elias wasn't. By 5 p.m., Jake had gone straight to Madeline, and by 6 p.m., Elias was in a meeting with both of them. "Elias," Madeline said smoothly, "I appreciate your commitment to security, but this resistance, it's not collaborative. We need a team mindset." "I've spent 11 years building the systems you want to poke around in," Elias replied calmly. "One mistake with admin access and you'll brick our production environment. This isn't about resistance, it's about caution." Madeline leaned back in her chair. "Duly noted, but change is coming. I suggest you adapt." Elias nodded once, understood. But deep inside, something cracked. That night, walking home, the city buzzed around him, but his mind was quiet. He passed a bookstore with its lights still on and paused. Not to go in, just to stare at the stillness behind the glass. It reminded him of how he used to feel about Redbridge, how it felt like home. Now it felt like someone had rearranged all the furniture while he was still living in it. He wanted to believe she meant well, that she was simply new, nervous, that her decisions came from inexperience, not ego. But that part of him, the one that always extended grace, was growing tired. He took the long way home, stopped by his mother's house, watered the tomato vines, sat on the back porch in silence. He didn't speak aloud, but the question echoed in his chest. What happens when the house you built forgets who laid the first brick? The week unfolded like an apology, trying not to sound like one. Each day, Elias showed up before dawn, ran the scripts, checked the logs, answered support tickets, maintained uptime. Nobody noticed until something broke. That was the nature of the job. You only became visible when things went wrong. But this time, the danger wasn't in the system. It was in the people. On Thursday, an email came through. Subject: Infrastructure Review, Compliance Sync. From Madeline Carmichael. Please be available at 11 a.m. tomorrow for a mandatory systems audit meeting. Jake and Nora will be reviewing security redundancies and protocol chain of command. We expect your cooperation. It was signed, "Looking forward to your insights, Madeline." Elias read it 3 times. The words felt performative. Insights, he murmured, but what they wanted wasn't insight. It was compliance. Still, he showed up Friday at 10:58 a.m. Jake had already spread himself across the small conference room like a kid who thought he owned the playground. Nora sat beside him, tapping away on a laptop. Madeline entered last, greeting Elias with a nod. Not a smile, not a thank you for coming, just acknowledgement. "Let's begin," Jake said brightly, like this was just another slide deck. He launched into a presentation about agility bottlenecks, centralized risk models, and permission gatekeeping. Every term floated high above real infrastructure, full of sound, empty of grounding. Elias let them talk. Then Madeline turned to him. "So, Elias, walk us through the logic behind your current admin partitioning model." He met her gaze. "Redbridge runs on a modified authentication tree I wrote from scratch in 2015. It protects lateral movement between production and internal environments. Only 2 people have root access, myself and our compliance officer." Jake chuckled. "Right, see, that's the problem. It's too centralized. What if you got hit by a bus tomorrow?" Elias didn't blink. "Then the systems would keep running. For precisely that reason, I automated failover scripts with 2-week fallback tokens that self-destruct if mishandled. Documentation is in the secure repo, accessed via MFA and device whitelist." Jake's smile faded. Madeline interjected. "We understand your dedication, Elias, but the landscape is changing. We need more transparency." "Transparency isn't the issue," Elias replied calmly. "It's trust. And you don't build trust by handing out root keys to consultants on day 4. The silence in the room tightened. Jake fidgeted. Nora stopped typing. Madeline's voice came colder. "I'm afraid we'll have to restructure your role to align with the new tech leadership model." Elias understood immediately. "That's a termination notice then," he said, voice steady. She looked almost surprised at how directly he named it. "I'd like this to be a transition," she said. "We'll offer 3 months severance and a positive recommendation." Elias didn't move, didn't nod. Just let the air breathe between them. Then he reached into his bag, pulled out a USB drive, and set it gently on the table. "Here's the full system topology, network maps, service failover logic, auth rebuild guide." He stood up. "I recommend you read section 7.3 carefully before making any edits to the root structure. It warns about recursive permission loops. If you trigger one, you won't get a second chance." Jake scoffed. "Is that a threat?" Elias paused. "No, it's a truth." He walked out, calm, quiet, the way he always moved. Nobody clapped this time. That evening, Elias returned home, locked the door, and sat at his small kitchen table. The place smelled faintly of basil from the windowsill plants he always forgot to water. His laptop stayed closed. Instead, he brewed tea and pulled out an old leather notebook. He hadn't written in it since his father passed, a quiet man who used to say, "When people stop listening, don't raise your voice. Just sharpen your silence." He scribbled 1 line across the page. "They fired the architect to save money on blueprints." Then he flipped to a fresh page and began mapping something new. Not revenge, not even legacy, just a clean rebuild, on his own terms. Redbridge Systems prided itself on uptime. Their homepage boasted a 99.999% availability rate across all critical services. Clients trusted that when they logged in, things would work every time. Behind that number had always been one man. Quiet, methodical, invisible. Now, Elias Monroe was gone, and it was Monday. Jake Wyatt entered the office at 6:45 a.m., coffee in hand, humming. He glanced at the screens in the IT war room, still green, a few delayed authentication handshakes, nothing dramatic. He smirked. "See?" he whispered to himself. "Told them the guy was overkill." Nora Lum arrived next, bleary-eyed and cautious. She had spent the weekend rereading Elias's documentation. Section 7.3 haunted her. If you don't follow sequence exactly, the root will revoke all trust certs, the system won't crash, it'll just lock the door, forever. Jake hadn't read it. He was already planning an internal blog post about modernizing infrastructure through modular simplicity. By 7:02 a.m., something shifted. The central login server responded, but the token verifier didn't handshake. By 7:07, client sessions began expiring. By 7:12, no one inside Redbridge could log in, not even Jake. He laughed nervously. Okay, cute. He pinged Nora. Try your terminal. She did. The cursor blinked back, frozen. Then an alert flashed across all admin screens. Root trust chain broken. System authentication has been disabled. Underneath, only authorized reinitiation sequence may restore integrity. And finally, good luck. Jake blinked. What the hell? At 7:18 a.m., the phone started ringing. Clients couldn't access portals, sales teams couldn't open dashboards, engineers were locked out of Git, CFOs couldn't move funds. It was a silent avalanche. By 7:35 a.m., chaos replaced confidence. Jake frantically texted Madeline. Jake, something's wrong, Elias's script isn't responding, we're locked out. Did you follow his documentation? I skimmed it. He overcomplicated everything. Can you fix it? No. Silence. Nora quietly walked over and placed a printed copy of the infrastructure map in front of him. He warned us, she said. He told us exactly what not to touch. Jake's hands trembled slightly. Then you fix it. She shook her head. I don't have clearance. Only Elias ever had root. You tried to override him, you burned the failsafe. Jake stood there, silent. For the first time since he arrived, his certainty fractured. By 8:05 a.m., the press was calling. Clients were tweeting screenshots of error messages. Stock movement began. A whisper of collapse. And Madeline Carmichael realized something sickening. They hadn't just fired an engineer, they had amputated the company's brainstem. Across town, Elias sat on his porch, watching the sunrise break over the rooftops. He sipped his tea, calmly reading the morning ledger. His phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then again. Jake, Nora, Madeline. He didn't answer. Then came a name he hadn't expected. Lucas Carmichael, the founder, Madeline's father. Elias stared at the screen for a long time before pressing accept. Elias, Lucas said. His voice was weathered, precise. I take it you're aware? Elias simply replied. I warned them. Lucas exhaled. I know. A long silence followed. Then, Elias said softly, they made their choice. I made mine. Lucas nodded. I respect that. But I'm asking, not as a former boss, but as a man who built something he thought would last. Please, help me fix it. Elias didn't respond right away. He looked out over the horizon, the quiet street, the normalcy of the moment. I'll need full control, he finally said. No consultants, no committees, and she steps aside. Lucas didn't argue, agreed. Elias ended the call, then stood up, not with anger, not with pride, but with purpose. The Redbridge lobby looked the same. Same industrial lighting, same brushed steel panels, same smell of burnt coffee and stress. But for Elias Monroe, everything felt different. He walked in slowly, dressed simply. No badge, no escort, just a quiet presence in a room that used to orbit around his silent vigilance. A receptionist looked up nervously. She recognized him. Everyone did now. Mr. Monroe? They're expecting you upstairs. He nodded gently. Thank you. As the elevator climbed, Elias watched his reflection in the mirrored walls. His own eyes looked tired, but beneath the exhaustion sat something heavier, resolve. The doors opened. Lucas Carmichael was waiting. The old man's face, usually stoic, cracked with a hint of remorse. Elias, he said. Lucas. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. Instead, Lucas motioned toward the conference room, where chaos waited like a funeral no one had prepared for. Inside sat Madeline, flanked by 2 board members. Her posture was rigid, defensive, but her eyes, dark rings beneath them, held something Elias hadn't seen before, uncertainty. Before we start, Elias said softly, I'll speak to her, alone. The board hesitated, but Lucas nodded once and the others stepped out. Madeline stood. Elias? He raised a hand, not with anger, but precision. You don't need to defend yourself, he said. You were given power without the weight of consequence. That's not entirely your fault, but what happened is. She flinched. I trusted Jake. You ignored every line of failover documentation. You deleted root permissions without understanding the architecture. You let ego decide what experience should have protected. Her voice wavered. You make it sound like I meant to destroy everything. No, Elias replied quietly, but you fired the firemen, then built a bonfire. Silence. He sat. Do you know what hurt most? Elias continued. It wasn't losing the job. It was knowing that I was disposable the moment my work became invisible. That 7 years of 3 a.m. patches, crisis aversions, and silent saves didn't earn me trust. Just budget cuts. Madeline's lips parted, then closed again. She sat slowly. I didn't understand what you did until it broke. That, Elias said, looking her in the eye, is the problem, and the lesson. Her hands trembled slightly. I'll step down, she said. No, Elias answered. You'll stay, and you'll learn. If you're willing. Her breath caught. Why would you still help me? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, because I don't want the company to fail. But more than that, I don't want you to lead by fear or pride. I want you to lead by knowing. So we'll rebuild, together, but on one condition. She looked at him, quiet. You listen, he said. No filters, no fast answers, just listen. She nodded, for the first time without pretense. I will. The recovery process wasn't flashy. There was no Hollywood moment of a button pressed and systems lighting back up. Instead, Elias quietly restructured the root trust architecture, rewriting the cert chain by hand. He pulled an old backup from a non-cloud vault, a legacy tape he'd kept for worst-case scenarios which had been mocked for years. It saved them. Nora sat beside him during most of it, watching, asking, learning. Jake was nowhere to be seen. By noon, the servers blinked back to life. By 2 p.m., user logins were restored. By 4 p.m., Redbridge Systems was back online. At sunset, Lucas called a quiet meeting in the main hall. All teams were there: engineers, sales, legal, support. The tension hung in the air like thick fog. Lucas stepped forward and cleared his throat. Today, he began, we were brought to the brink, and we were saved by the man we cast out. He looked at Elias. No title can define what you've done here, but today I ask that you accept one more, CTO Emeritus, and the right to train and build the team that will succeed you, on your terms. Elias was quiet, then he nodded. But only if I get one thing. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Name it. A budget line that no one touches, Elias said, labeled Quiet Prevention. The room chuckled lightly. Lucas smiled. Granted. Redbridge Systems was back online, but recovery, Elias knew, wasn't just about code, it was about culture, and that would take longer. He returned to the quiet hum of his office, the one he'd once packed up in silence. The coffee mug he left behind still sat on the shelf, dusty, forgotten, but unbroken. He picked it up, turned it in his hand, and gently set it down again. Feels strange, doesn't it? Came a voice. It was Nora. She leaned against the doorframe, laptop tucked under her arm, eyes bright with questions. Feels like cleaning up after a flood, Elias said, motioning for her to come in. Nothing's quite where you left it, and everything smells damp. She chuckled. I brought the new change management draft if you'd like to review. He smiled faintly. I would, but first, let me ask, why are you still here? Nora blinked. You mean today? No, Elias said. I mean after all this, after watching what happened to me, to the system. Why didn't you walk away? She paused, then sat. Because I believe in something that doesn't exist here yet, she said. Accountable leadership. And because someone like you believed in me when no one else did. He nodded slowly. That's a good reason. They reviewed the draft together, side by side, line by line. For every technical correction, Elias added a question. Why this approach? What happens if it fails? Who holds the keys? Nora answered carefully, thoughtfully. And when she didn't know, she said so. That mattered more than she realized. Across the building, Madeline sat alone in her new office. A cold cup of tea sat untouched on her desk. Her laptop was open to the dashboard Elias had resurrected. All the green lights glowed again, but the silence hurt more than Red ever had. The board had agreed to let her stay on, provisionally. Lucas vouched for her, but the confidence was conditional. Thin as paper, a knock pulled her from thought. It was Carol Myers, VP of Finance. Older, sharp, not one for games. Do you have a minute? Carol asked. Madeline motioned for her to sit. Carol did, but without warmth. I'm going to say something uncomfortable, she began, and I'd appreciate if you didn't interrupt. Madeline nodded, wary. You burned trust here, Carol said, not just with Elias, with all of us. You brought in an outsider, fired someone you didn't understand, and almost took the company down in 72 hours. This isn't about youth. It's about humility, and you didn't show any. Madeline flinched but said nothing. Carol softened slightly. But you're still here, which means you have a chance. So take the time to understand the people who don't sit in boardrooms, the ones whose names aren't on title slides. She stood and listened to Elias, not because he's always right, but because he knows how to be when it counts. Then she left. Madeline sat there, hands clenched, silent. Then slowly she opened a notebook and began to write. Over the next 2 weeks, Elias became both visible and invisible again. He didn't return as an employee, he didn't reclaim his old title, but he built something else. A system of documentation, a structure of process, a culture of calm, not chaos. He worked closely with Nora, handing off not just tasks but philosophies. Good code solves the problem, he told her one morning. Great code solves the problem someone else will have 5 years from now. They built new checklists, reboot protocols, access control maps. And when people questioned why it was all necessary, Elias never raised his voice. He just said, "Because no one remembers the fire drill until there's smoke." Then came the day Madeline asked to shadow him. "I want to learn," she said quietly after a meeting. "Not just what went wrong, but why it took so long for me to see it." He studied her for a moment. There was no ego in her eyes, just exhaustion and openness. So he nodded, and for the first time he invited her to the war room. She watched him work, watched him diagram failure points, watched him pause and explain without condescension. He made no speeches, he didn't gloat, and when he spoke to her, it was with the same still voice he'd always used. She asked questions, real ones, and when she didn't know something, she wrote it down. At the end of the day, she lingered. "You know," she said, "you could have let it all fall. Let me drown in it." Elias turned off the monitor and looked at her. "I thought about it." She blinked. "But then I remembered what it's like to be young and in over your head," he continued. "And I remembered how someone once showed me grace I didn't deserve." Madeline's voice cracked. "Thank you." Elias gave a small nod. "Don't thank me, just pass it forward when it's your turn." The last light of the day filtered through the tall windows of Redbridge Systems. Most of the staff had gone home. The server hum was steady now, like a heartbeat finally returned to rhythm. In the corner of the third-floor atrium, Elias Monroe stood quietly by a row of framed photos, portraits of past leaders, milestones, and patents. He was holding a manila envelope. Inside, the final version of the transition guide. Diagrams, failover steps, recovery logic, a 5-year maintenance horizon, the blueprint of order. It wasn't just technical, it was personal. A record of lessons learned in silence. "Thought I'd find you here," Nora Lum said softly, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Elias turned, smiling faintly. Old habits. They sat on the bench beneath the founding plaque. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I've been carrying a mountain," he said, and finally set it down. She nodded, then reached into her satchel and handed him a folded note. "Madeline asked me to give you this." He unfolded it. The handwriting was unsure but sincere. "Elias, I won't pretend to understand the weight you've carried, but I see it now. I see what it means to lead with presence instead of position. I've made mistakes I can't undo, but I will earn back the trust you held in this place, one person at a time. Thank you for not letting me fall, even when I deserved to. Madeline," he exhaled, quietly, then tucked the note into his jacket. The next morning, Redbridge held an all-hands meeting. It wasn't in the main auditorium, it was in the cafeteria, shoulder to shoulder, real, unfiltered. Lucas Carmichael, now honorary chairman, stood at the front, cane in hand, but he didn't speak first. Madeline did. She wore no heels, no suit jacket, just a plain blouse, notepad in hand, voice calm but human. "Before I say anything else," she began, "I owe this company something far greater than numbers or apologies." She looked across the room, held their eyes. "I owe you my listening." A murmur. "Surprise," she continued. "When I first came in, I thought leadership meant speed, vision, certainty, but I've come to understand that none of those matter without humility or respect." She paused. Let the silence breathe. "I was wrong to dismiss the people who built this company's spine. Elias Monroe saved this company, twice, not with drama, but with quiet clarity." She turned to him, where he stood by the back wall. "Elias, on behalf of every person who will never see the disaster you prevented, thank you." There was a hush, then a slow rising applause. And for once, Elias didn't disappear into the noise. He nodded, just once. That was enough. That week, Elias finalized his departure papers. He wasn't leaving in anger. He wasn't burned out. He was complete. He'd handed over his knowledge, trained Nora, left Redbridge stronger than he found it. He had nothing more to prove. On Friday afternoon, Nora found him by the elevators, badge in hand. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Don't," Elias replied. "Just do it better than I did." She blinked. "But you." He raised a hand gently. "You're younger, smarter in some ways, and you care. That's what this place needs. Not just technical minds, but compassionate ones." She swallowed a lump in her throat, then hugged him. He hugged her back. When the elevator dinged, he stepped in. But before the doors closed, he turned back. "One more thing," he said. "Yeah? Tell Madeline, legacy isn't written in job titles. It's written in what breaks when you're gone." And with that, the doors slid shut. 6 months later, the plaque by the server room read, "The Monroe Protocol, in honor of Elias Monroe, whose quiet stewardship saved Redbridge Systems in its most vulnerable hour." His example remains our standard. Calm, clear, compassionate. Established by unanimous vote March 3rd, 2025. Madeline Carmichael's leadership evolved slowly but meaningfully. She built a rotation program for every department head, including herself. Every exec spent 1 day per quarter sitting with their teams, not above them. She created an Ask Me Anything wall, anonymous, unfiltered feedback. She read every submission, and she stopped assuming. She started asking. Nora Lum became Director of Infrastructure 6 months later. Her first decision? Expanding documentation as part of onboarding. Her second? Mentoring 3 interns Elias never met, but who now knew his name. As for Elias, he never posted on LinkedIn, never gave interviews, but word spread, quietly. Other companies came calling. Not because he made noise, but because they knew what silence like his was worth. And somewhere in a small office of his own making, he hung the thank you letter from Madeline. Next to a single phrase he had typed, printed, and framed. "You won't always be noticed, but when it breaks without you, they'll know." And just like that, the quiet man everyone forgot became the reason they remembered how fragile systems and people really are. Elias Monroe didn't shout. He didn't retaliate. He simply stepped back and let the silence speak. But beneath that silence was dignity, integrity, a reminder that leadership isn't about who speaks the loudest, it's about who shows up when no one's watching. Madeline learned that too late, and maybe so have we. Because for every Elias in the world, there's a system built to ignore them, to dismiss the steady hands, to replace wisdom with ego, to reward appearances and punish humility. Let this story remind us that bias doesn't always wear a label. It hides in every careless decision. That value isn't always visible. It's felt when it's missing. And that real change begins when we start listening, especially to the ones we almost pushed away. If this story moved you, even just a little, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep telling stories that speak up for the silent ones, because the next time someone gets erased, the whole system might crash again. And maybe, next time, you'll be the one who notices.